Chapter 1. The Scream Behind the Sofa. When it comes to spiders, I think most people would agree they're not exactly welcome guests. I don't love them either, but if they're outside in the garden or crawling across a far corner of the ceiling, I can usually tolerate them. If one comes too close, I might grab a broom or a glass and gently escort it outside. That's normal, right? But then there's my friend. Her fear of spiders isn't just a little discomfort or a shiver down the spine. Number. Her fear is something else entirely, something louder, bigger, and far more dramatic. She doesn't just step away from a spider, she screams. Not a small gasp or a startled shout, a full-on, top-of-her-lungs, blood-curdling scream that could wake the entire neighborhood. And has. She once screamed so loudly at a spider in her bathroom that her next-door neighbor nearly called the police. Another time, she froze in place for so long after spotting a spider near her bed that her legs gave out beneath her. And yes, once she fainted, right on the kitchen floor, all because a small harmless spider had crawled across the window. When she sees one, it's as if her entire world falls apart. She shakes uncontrollably, her voice disappears, and her eyes widen with panic. I've seen her try to run and forget where the door was. I've seen her hide behind furniture, clutching a pillow like it was a shield. For her, spiders aren't just creepy. They're terrifying monsters in miniature. So imagine my shock when, one sunny afternoon, we were sitting at our favorite coffee shop sipping iced lattes, and she leaned across the table and said, with the most casual smile, "Guess what? I've got a new pet." I raised an eyebrow. "A cat?" "Nope." "A dog?" She shook her head, grinning now. "A rabbit? A budgie?" She leaned in closer, her eyes dancing with excitement. "A spider?" I nearly choked on my drink. "A what?" "A spider," she said again, slower this time. "I got a pet spider." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. She meant it. The same person who once screamed so loudly at a tiny garden spider that traffic stopped outside her house, now had one living with her. "But how?" I asked, still trying to make sense of it. She laughed softly and said, "I finally got tired of living in fear, so I decided to do something about it. I went to see a doctor, not just any doctor, a psychiatrist, one who specializes in phobias." I leaned back in my chair, completely stunned. This woman, who used to jump at shadows, had voluntarily walked into a therapist's office to face her fear? She nodded. "He told me I had a condition called arachnophobia, an irrational and extreme fear of spiders, and apparently 1 in 50 people suffer from it severely." "And now you have a spider?" I asked again, just to be sure I'd heard correctly. She smiled. "Not just yet, but I'm working on it. I'm going through something called behavioral therapy, step by step." And as she sat there, calmly sipping her coffee, telling me about the tiny plastic spider her therapist made her touch and how she'd screamed in his office on the very first day, I realized something extraordinary. She wasn't just facing a fear. She was rewriting her story. Chapter 2. The Spider on the Television. Her journey didn't begin with courage. It began with a scream. On the first day of therapy, the psychiatrist didn't waste time. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a tiny spider. Not a real one, a plastic one, with stiff black legs and painted red eyes. But to her, it didn't matter. She screamed the moment she saw it. The sound filled the room, echoing off the walls like a fire alarm. The doctor didn't flinch. He calmly placed the spider on the desk and waited. "It's plastic," he said gently. "Just a toy." She nodded, trembling, still unable to take her eyes off it. "I know," she whispered, "but my body doesn't care." He explained the process. This was called the behavioral approach, a slow, steady exposure to what she feared most. No hypnosis, no digging into childhood trauma, just her and the thing she feared facing off a little more each day. On that first day, he asked her to touch it. She refused. Then he asked her again. Tears welled in her eyes. Her hands shook. But after several minutes, with her breath held and her heart racing, she reached out and tapped it. Just once. Her fingertips brushed against the smooth plastic surface. Then she pulled her hand back like she'd touched fire. "That's enough for today," the doctor said, his voice calm. "You did well. Come back tomorrow." And she did. Day after day, each session brought a new challenge. At first, she could only glance at the spider without screaming. Then she was able to hold it for 5 seconds, then 5 minutes. Slowly, steadily, fear began to lose its grip. One day, the spider was on her chair when she entered. She stared at it, frozen. Then, gathering herself, she picked it up and set it on the doctor's desk before sitting down. No scream, no tears. "Good," the doctor said with a small nod. "Now take it home." She blinked. "Take it home?" "Yes," he said. "This fear can't only be faced in this room. You need to bring it into your world." She hesitated, but then nodded. When she got home, she placed the spider on the kitchen counter and sat across the room, watching it like it might move. It didn't. Of course it didn't. That night, the spider slept in her bathroom. She placed it on the edge of the bathtub, the very spot where real spiders often appeared. Her stomach turned as she walked past it, brushing her teeth without daring to look. But she didn't scream. The next day, the spider moved to her living room. She placed it carefully on top of the television. At first, she avoided watching TV at all. But by evening, she found herself peeking over at it. The plastic legs didn't twitch. The red eyes didn't glow. It just sat there, harmless and still. Day by day, her fear shrank, like shadows retreating from morning light. Then came the hardest part. "The bed," the psychiatrist said during her next visit. "It's time." "No way," she said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "It's a spider," she replied. "No, it's plastic," he corrected. "It's not real. You know that now." That night, she placed it carefully on the blanket near the pillow. Her breath trembled. She lay down beside it, eyes wide in the dark. Every creak of the house made her flinch, but she didn't move it. She didn't run. And in the morning, it was still there. She had slept through the night with a spider in her bed. It was only plastic, but for her, it was everything. Each victory was small, touching it for longer, carrying it from room to room, letting it sit closer to her without moving away. Her body still reacted, her heart still raced, but she learned to stay, to breathe, to tell herself, "This is just a thing. It can't hurt me." She no longer screamed when she saw it. She didn't freeze. She still felt fear, but it didn't control her anymore. And then came the biggest test of all. When she arrived at the psychiatrist's office that morning, he was already sitting at his desk. But this time, it wasn't the plastic spider that greeted her. It was real, a live spider sitting calmly in the center of the desk. Its long, furry legs twitched gently. Its tiny black eyes glistened. She froze in the doorway. Every part of her wanted to turn and run. Her breath caught in her throat. But then she remembered the plastic spider in her bed, the hours she'd sat in front of the television with it watching over her, the quiet nights she survived. So she stayed, not close, not brave, not yet, but she stayed for 5 whole minutes. Chapter 3. One spider down, one beetle to go. The door creaked as she stepped into the psychiatrist's office, her breath steady but nervous. She had done everything he asked. Touched the spider, moved it, lived with it, even slept beside it. The fear was still there somewhere inside her, but it had grown quiet. But today, something was different. Sitting in the middle of the desk wasn't the familiar plastic spider. It was real. Its legs were thick and hairy, its small body pulsed gently as it moved, and its shiny eyes seemed to watch her. Her heart raced, but she didn't scream. Not this time. She stood still, frozen, but not out of terror, out of choice. She took a slow breath and sat down, far on the other side of the room. "That's close enough for today," the psychiatrist said with a smile, and so began the final phase of her journey. Each day she returned. On the first day, she managed to sit in the same room as the spider for 5 minutes. On the second, she moved her chair a little closer. Her hands trembled, but she didn't flee. On the third day, she sat right across from it, her legs barely a few feet away. By the end of the week, she no longer leaned away in fear. She leaned forward, curious, cautious, but present. And then the moment came. The psychiatrist picked up the spider in his hand. "I want you to try," he said. She looked at the tiny creature, now crawling slowly across his palm. Her stomach turned, her fingers curled instinctively into fists. But she remembered the plastic spider in her bed, the days spent facing her fears. She reached out. Her fingertip brushed its leg. She shivered, but she didn't scream. She didn't pull away. "That's enough," he said gently. But the next day, she did more. She held it for a second, then a few seconds, then, eventually, a minute. She could feel its tiny legs moving across her skin, ticklish and strange. But she kept her hand steady. Her fear hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. It was smaller now, manageable. And one day, the psychiatrist handed her a small box. "Take it home," he said. "Let it live with you." She blinked. "For real?" He smiled. "You've earned it." And so she did. She placed the box carefully on her bookshelf, and for the first time in her life, the sight of a spider in her home didn't send her into panic. She even gave it a name, Pip. At our next coffee meetup, she could barely wait to tell me. "I've got a pet spider," she beamed. "You're joking," I said, almost spitting out my drink. "Nope, a real one, lives with me now." I stared at her in disbelief. The same girl who used to scream at cartoons with spiders in them now had one walking around her bookshelf. "That's incredible," I said. "Seriously, well done." She looked proud, calm, lighter than I had ever seen her. But then it happened. As she lifted her cup to sip, her eyes suddenly widened. She froze. The color drained from her face. "What's wrong?" I asked. She slowly pointed to the floor beneath our table. Her lips trembled. "There," she whispered. "Look." I glanced down. It wasn't a spider, it was a beetle, a big shiny black beetle crawling slowly across the cafe floor, its tiny legs skittering against the tile. And then she screamed, a piercing, window-rattling scream that made everyone in the cafe turn around in alarm. She jumped onto her chair, knocking over her cup, arms flailing, voice rising. I burst into laughter. "A beetle?" I said, trying to calm her. "You tamed your fear of spiders, and now this?" She clutched my arm. "I don't care. Spiders I can handle, but that thing has wings." I helped her down and tried to shoo the beetle away with a napkin. She sighed and shook her head. "Looks like I need a new therapist." I grinned. "Well, one creepy crawly at a time." She laughed too, eventually, because sometimes healing isn't a perfect line. Sometimes it's hilarious. Sometimes it's messy. But it always starts with a choice to try. And for her, one spider down, one beetle to go.